Some say the greatest stories in the vast reach of the stars begin with the most humble of origins, and for a man who would one day change the fate of countless worlds, that beginning was as quiet as a breath. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the journey started on the distant and often overlooked planet of Stewjon. Born in the year 57 BBY, he was a child of a world that didn't often see the grand scale of galactic politics or the shimmering lights of the core systems. He was just a tiny infant, barely 6 months old, when the Seekers of the Jedi Order arrived. These Seekers, trained to find the flicker of potential in the youngest minds, sensed something deeply special in this child. They felt a resonance in him that was rare, a spark that suggested a future of great importance. At that age, he was just a baby, unaware of the weight that would one day rest on his shoulders. But those who found him knew he was destined for a life far beyond the borders of his home world. Little did anyone truly know at the time that this small child, barely able to crawl, would grow up to become one of the most legendary figures in all of galactic history. A name whispered with respect by allies and with caution by those who stood in his way. Picture the Jedi Temple on Coruscant in your mind's eye. It was a place of immense beauty and ancient power, its towering spires reaching up like fingers toward the stars, piercing the thick clouds of the city planet. This was a place where the air itself seemed to hum with the energy of thousands of years of history. Within these massive, echoing halls, young Obi-Wan found his first real home. He wasn't raised by parents in the traditional sense, but by an order that valued wisdom, peace, and connection to the universe. He was placed as part of the Kiba clan, a group of younglings who learned and grew together like a family of choice rather than blood. Under the watchful and wise eyes of Grandmaster Yoda, whose years of experience were as vast as the galaxy itself, and the skilled warrior Craig, Obi-Wan took his very first steps into a much larger world. By the age of 3, while most children were just beginning to understand the basics of language and play, he was already being taught how to reach out and touch the Force. He learned about that mysterious and beautiful energy field that binds everything together, the thread that connects the smallest blade of grass to the most massive star. He was taught to listen to the silence and feel the heartbeat of the galaxy. However, as he grew, it became clear that young Obi-Wan wasn't exactly your typical, perfectly obedient student. While the Jedi promoted peace and following the rules, the teachers at the temple quickly learned that this particular boy had a bit of a rebellious streak hidden beneath his polite exterior. While other younglings followed the instructions of their masters to the letter, never straying from the path, Obi-Wan was different. He questioned almost everything. He wanted to know why things were done the way they were, and he often pushed against the boundaries that were set for him. There were times when he didn't just push those boundaries, he flat out broke the rules. It wasn't that he was a mean-spirited child or that he wanted to cause any real harm. He simply couldn't help himself. He had instincts that were incredibly sharp, and he felt a deep need to follow them, even when those instincts led him down corridors that were strictly unauthorized or into restricted areas of the massive temple where younglings were never supposed to go. He was a seeker of truth and adventure, and sometimes the rules felt like walls that were meant to be climbed rather than respected. This rebellious nature, while a sign of a strong mind, became quite a significant problem when the time came for him to move from a youngling to a Padawan learner. In the Jedi Order, a student needs a master to take them under their wing for one-on-one training, but many Jedi Knights and Masters looked at young Kenobi's record and saw a troublemaker. They saw the reports of his late-night wanderings and his constant questioning of authority, and they politely declined to take him as their student. They wanted someone easier to manage, someone who wouldn't challenge them at every turn. But Master Yoda, who had been teaching the ways of the Force for over 800 years, saw something very different in the boy. Where others saw a difficult student who wouldn't listen, Yoda saw a deep well of potential. He saw a boy who had the courage to think for himself, a trait that would be vital in the years to come. That is why Yoda made a very specific choice for Obi-Wan's future. He chose Qui-Gon Jinn to become Obi-Wan's master. Qui-Gon Jinn was not exactly the model of a perfect Jedi in the eyes of the High Council either. He was a man who followed his own path, often ignoring the strict mandates of the leaders in favor of what he believed the Force was telling him in the moment. He frequently butted heads with the council members, arguing for a more fluid and living approach to their duties. Yoda, in his infinite wisdom, knew that this was exactly the kind of person Obi-Wan needed. Who better to guide a rebellious spirit than someone who truly understood the internal struggle between following a set of ancient rules and following one's own heart and instincts? Yoda knew that if these two were paired together, they would challenge each other in ways that would make them both stronger. It was a gamble, perhaps, but it was one that would change the course of the Jedi Order forever. At the age of 13, a pivotal year for any young Jedi, Obi-Wan officially became Qui-Gon's Padawan learner. Their early relationship, however, was not exactly what you would call smooth sailing. It was a rocky start, to say the least. Qui-Gon's teaching methods were highly unorthodox. He didn't focus on rote memorization or standard drills in the way Obi-Wan had expected. Instead, he pushed his student to focus on the living Force, the energy of the present moment. This often left the young and structured Obi-Wan feeling confused, frustrated, and sometimes even a little bit neglected. He wanted clear answers and a straight path, but Qui-Gon gave him riddles and challenges that forced him to find his own way. But as the weeks turned into months and the months into years, something began to click between them. They started to understand each other's rhythms. A moment that truly symbolized this growing bond was when Obi-Wan built his very first lightsaber. When he sat down to design the weapon that would be his constant companion, he chose to model it after his master's own design. It was a silent but powerful sign of the deep respect and affection that had grown between the two of them, a bridge across their initial differences. Together, the master and the apprentice embarked on missions that took them across the vast reaches of the galaxy, seeing sights that most people only dream of. They were sent to the beautiful planet of Alderaan, where they worked to protect the royal palace and its occupants during a time of tension. They navigated the incredibly treacherous and harsh landscapes of Ryloth, learning how to survive in environments that were as dangerous as they were stunning. They even spent a very memorable life day on Kashyyyk, the magnificent forest home of the Wookiees. During one particularly intense mission on that same world of giant trees and deep shadows, they found themselves in a situation where they were hunting, or rather, being hunted, by Trandoshan hunters who were known for their cruelty and skill. Each of these missions served as a classroom for Obi-Wan. He wasn't just learning how to use a lightsaber or how to move objects with his mind. He was learning about life itself. He saw the beauty of different cultures and the darkness that could reside in the hearts of those who sought power. He learned that being a Jedi was about more than just combat. It was about understanding the people you were sworn to protect. Along the way, as he traveled the stars and trained in the temple, Obi-Wan formed friendships that would last a lifetime and provide him with a sense of community. His fellow younglings, like Garen and Siri, shared his early adventures and the many scrapes they got into within the temple walls. They were the ones he could talk to when the training felt too hard or when he felt like he didn't fit in. Then there was a young Mon Calamari named Bant Irin, who became one of his closest and most trusted confidants. Their bond was one of quiet understanding and deep loyalty. And in the bustling, often dangerous lower levels of Coruscant, far below the gleaming spires of the temple, he struck up an unlikely but enduring friendship with a four-armed basilisk named Dexter Jetster. Dexter was a man of the world, a cook with a past full of adventure, whose knowledge of the galaxy's hidden corners and its many secrets would prove to be invaluable in the years to come. These friends were the anchors that kept Obi-Wan grounded as his life became increasingly complicated. When Obi-Wan finally earned the right to undertake solo missions, proving that he was capable of handling the responsibilities of a Jedi on his own, his first assignment took him to the world of Lenara. It was a test of his resolve and his ability to think on his feet without Qui-Gon there to guide him. He also made several visits to a mysterious and ancient fortress on the planet Lamu, and he ventured into the highly sophisticated and complex world of Galenta. Each of these missions built his confidence, honed his physical and mental skills, and slowly shaped him into the man he was destined to become. He was no longer just a rebellious boy. He was becoming a guardian of the peace, someone who could walk into a room and command respect not through force, but through wisdom and presence. But perhaps the most important lesson that young Obi-Wan learned during these formative and busy years wasn't about how to execute a perfect lightsaber strike or how to sense a disturbance in the Force from miles away. It was a lesson about balance. He had to find the middle ground between the strict rules of the Jedi and his own natural instincts. He had to learn the difference between his duty to the Order and his compassion for the individuals he met. He spent a lot of time thinking about the living Force that Qui-Gon spoke about so often. The idea that the present moment and the feelings of living beings were just as important as the ancient laws and the grand plan. This understanding of balance would serve him incredibly well in the massive challenges that lay ahead of him, challenges that would test every part of his being. As the galaxy stood on the very brink of changes that no one, not even the incredibly wise Master Yoda, could fully foresee, Obi-Wan was readying himself for a role he never asked for but was perfectly suited to play. The year was 32 BBY, and the galaxy was starting to shift in ways that felt uneasy and cold. On the surface of things, it seemed like just another one of those boring trade disputes that the Senate was always arguing about. The powerful and greedy Trade Federation had surrounded the peaceful and lush planet of Naboo with massive warships, choking off its supply lines in what they claimed was a perfectly legal protest against new taxation laws. But something much darker and more sinister was lurking beneath the surface of this political move. Supreme Chancellor Valorum, watching the crisis unfold from his high office on Coruscant, grew worried. He decided to bypass the slow and often corrupt bureaucracy of the Senate and send in negotiators to settle the matter quickly. He didn't send politicians or career diplomats who could be bought or bullied. He chose the Jedi. Specifically, he chose Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, for what everyone assumed would be a straightforward and simple diplomatic mission. Nobody could have possibly predicted at that moment how this one decision would go on to reshape the entire galaxy for generations to come. When Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon arrived on the Trade Federation command ship, the welcome they received was anything but diplomatic. In fact, it was downright deadly. The moment they sat down in the conference room to wait for the Viceroy, the room began to fill with a thick, green, and lethal dioxis gas. It was immediately clear that this wasn't a negotiation at all. It was a cold-blooded assassination attempt. Using their breath control techniques and their lightsabers, the two Jedi fought their way through the ship's ventilation shafts, avoiding battle droids and security teams. As they moved through the massive vessel, they stumbled upon something that changed the entire nature of their mission: an invasion army. The Trade Federation hadn't just come to blockade the planet. They had assembled thousands upon thousands of battle droids, tanks, and landing craft, all ready to launch a full-scale military attack on the peaceful people of Naboo. This was no longer just a disagreement about trade routes. This was an act of unprovoked war. Knowing they had to warn the people of Naboo before the first droids touched the ground, the Jedi managed to hitch a ride on one of the landing craft heading to the planet's surface. They landed in the thick, misty swamps of the world, and it was there that fate introduced them to one of the most unlikely guides in history, a Gungan named Jar Jar Binks. While he was clumsy and often confused, Jar Jar was their key to surviving the swamp and finding help. Through him, they discovered an entire civilization of Gungans living in magnificent, glowing underwater cities hidden beneath the lakes. It was a beautiful sight, but they couldn't afford to marvel at this discovery for long. The capital city of Theed was already under attack, and the planet's young and brave ruler, Queen Amidala, needed their help desperately. Queen Amidala was no ordinary leader. Despite her youth and the ornate heavy robes she wore, she showed a level of courage and wisdom that impressed even the Jedi. She refused to let her people suffer under the Trade Federation's thumb. With the help of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, she managed to escape the clutches of the droids in her royal starship. But their victory was very short-lived. During the escape, the ship's shield generator was badly damaged by Federation fire. They were forced to seek refuge on a nearby planet to make repairs, a world that was as far from the refined halls of Naboo or Coruscant as you could imagine, the desert planet of Tatooine. It was a harsh, lawless place sitting far outside the reach of the Republic's laws. None of them realized then that this seemingly random detour caused by a broken part would set in motion a series of events that would echo through the history of the galaxy forever. It was on this desert world that they found a young boy named Anakin Skywalker, a boy whose connection to the Force was unlike anything Qui-Gon had ever seen. When they finally returned to Naboo after their time on the desert world, they came with a daring and desperate plan. While the brave Gungan army drew the massive Trade Federation droid forces into an open battle on the grassy plains, acting as a grand distraction, our Jedi heroes joined Queen Amidala and her loyal guards in a mission to retake the capital city and capture the Viceroy. But as they fought their way through the power generator complex beneath the magnificent Theed Palace, they found themselves blocked by something straight out of an ancient and terrifying nightmare, a Sith Lord. For over 1,000 years, the Sith had been thought to be extinct, existing only in old history books and cautionary tales told to frighten Jedi younglings in the dark. Yet here stood Darth Maul, very real and incredibly lethal. His double-bladed red lightsaber illuminated the shadows with a blood-colored glow, and his eyes burned with a hatred that was cold and absolute. This wasn't just a fight for the freedom of Naboo anymore. This was the return of an ancient darkness, a battle between light and dark, good and evil, Jedi and Sith. The duel that followed was a blur of motion and energy, pushing both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon to their absolute physical and mental limits. They fought through the corridors and over the narrow catwalks of the generator hub, the sound of their clashing blades echoing like thunder. But in a moment that would haunt Obi-Wan's dreams and thoughts for decades to come, the two Jedi were separated by a series of pulsing energy shields. Obi-Wan could only watch in absolute horror, trapped behind a wall of light, as Darth Maul struck down his master. Qui-Gon Jinn, the man who had guided him, challenged him and become like a father to him, fell to the floor, mortally wounded. When the final shield finally dropped, Obi-Wan charged forward with a ferocity he had never felt before. He faced Maul alone, and everything he had ever learned in the temple, every mission he had ever gone on, and every word his master had spoken was put to the ultimate test. In those desperate, heart-pounding moments, Obi-Wan Kenobi did something that no Jedi had managed to do in a millennium. He defeated a Sith Lord in single combat. Using his fallen master's lightsaber, he found the opening he needed and struck the final blow, sending Maul plummeting down into the seemingly bottomless depths of the generator complex. But the victory brought him very little joy. He rushed to his master's side, but it was too late to save him. As Qui-Gon lay dying in his arms, he had one last heavy request for his Padawan: train the boy. He was talking about young Anakin Skywalker, the child they had found on the desert world. The victory celebration in the streets of Theed was a beautiful sight, with flowers falling and the people cheering, but for Obi-Wan, it was bittersweet. Yes, Naboo was free from the Trade Federation. Yes, he had been promoted to the rank of Jedi Knight, an honor made even more significant because of his bravery and his defeat of a Sith. But as he stood by the funeral pyre of his master, watching the flames burn against the dark night sky, Obi-Wan felt the immense weight of his new responsibilities settling onto his shoulders like a lead cloak. The Jedi Council had initially resisted his request to train Anakin. They thought the boy was too old to start the training, that he was too emotional, and that he was far too attached to his mother and his past life. They feared the shadow they sensed in the boy's future. But Obi-Wan stood firm. He had made a promise to his dying master, a man he loved, and he intended to keep that promise no matter what the council said. He told them he would train Anakin Skywalker, whether he had their approval or not. In the end, they gave in, but the sense of unease remained. Looking back, the Naboo crisis was the moment the world changed. It was the end of an era of relative peace that had lasted for 1,000 years. The reappearance of the Sith shattered the illusion of safety that the Jedi had lived under. The galaxy was entering a new age, one filled with growing shadows, hidden enemies, and uncertainties that would test the resolve of everyone. And right at the center of it all stood Obi-Wan Kenobi, a newly knighted Jedi who was suddenly and unexpectedly responsible for training a boy who many believed was the chosen one, the one who would bring balance to the Force. It was a daunting task for anyone, let alone someone who had just lost their own guide. He had to grow up fast, moving from the role of a student to the role of a teacher in the blink of an eye. Becoming a true Jedi Master isn't something that happens overnight, and it certainly isn't something that can be learned just from books or practice sessions in a safe room. It takes years of constant training, wisdom that can only be gained through real-world experience, and a deep, intuitive understanding of both the Force and the complexities of human nature. But sometimes, fate doesn't give you the luxury of time. When Obi-Wan took Anakin Skywalker as his Padawan, he was barely out of his own training. The ink on his certification as a Jedi Knight hadn't even had time to dry, so to speak, and yet here he was, responsible for the education and well-being of a boy who might be the most powerful Force user the galaxy had ever seen. He was a young man himself, still mourning his master, and now he had to be the steady hand for someone else. Those first few months of their partnership were a crash course in many things, including parenting as much as teaching. Anakin, who had spent his entire life as a slave on the desert world of Tatooine, struggled immensely with his new environment. He was used to a world of sand, heat, and forced labor, not the cold, sterile, and highly disciplined halls of the Jedi Temple. He struggled with fears of abandonment, a deep-seated worry that he would lose this new life just as he had been forced to leave his mother behind. During that first year, he would often sneak out of his own room and sleep on the floor near Obi-Wan's bed, seeking the security and comfort of his new master's presence in a world that felt alien and scary. For Obi-Wan, this was a stark and daily reminder that he wasn't just training a student in the arts of combat and philosophy. He was helping a traumatized child adjust to a completely new existence. It required a level of patience and empathy that he had to develop on the fly. Their early training sessions focused heavily on the physical side of being a Jedi, specifically lightsaber combat. But teaching Anakin was nothing like teaching any other Padawan. The boy had raw talent and a connection to the Force that was off the charts, but he had missed out on all the years of foundational training that most Jedi received when they were very small children. He was ahead in power, but behind in discipline. The Jedi Council's concerns about Anakin's training were always there, looming in the background like a storm cloud that wouldn't move. They worried about his age and his emotions, and these concerns cast a long shadow over the early years of his apprenticeship. But Obi-Wan remained steadfast and loyal. He was determined to honor the promise he had made to Qui-Gon, and he was equally determined to prove that his faith in Anakin was not misplaced. He saw the good in the boy, the desire to help others, and the incredible potential for greatness. One of their first major milestones as master and apprentice came with a long and solemn journey to the frozen world of Ilum. This was the place where the ancient crystal caves were located, and it was there that Anakin would have to find his own crystal to construct his first lightsaber. It was a rite of passage that every Jedi went through, a test of their connection to the Force. Anakin entered the caves alone, facing his own fears and doubts in the dark. When he emerged, he held a blue kyber crystal that resonated perfectly with his energy. Under Obi-Wan's careful and proud guidance, he crafted a weapon that was uniquely his, a tool that would serve him through countless adventures and battles. Well, at least until that particular lightsaber was destroyed during the chaos on Geonosis years later, but that's a story for another time. The process of building it, however, was a moment where they truly bonded as a team. As the years passed, their missions together started small, but quickly grew in complexity and danger. They were sent to study an impossible and strange orbit around a dead dwarf star, a mission that pushed the very boundaries of what they understood about space and the energy that flows through it. They joined forces with another powerful Jedi, Master Shak Ti, for a very challenging assignment on the world of Nar Shaddaa, a place known for its crime and corruption. And yes, there was that one very memorable incident involving the Gundarks, where Anakin had to jump in and save his master's skin from a very sticky situation. Obi-Wan would never hear the end of that one. Anakin loved to bring it up whenever he felt like teasing his master. But beneath the teasing and the laughter, there was a growing sense of mutual reliance. They were learning how to watch each other's backs in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing and perfect teamwork. Their personalities and their teaching styles often clashed like two lightsabers in a heated duel. Obi-Wan was a man who valued patience, careful study, and thinking before acting. He believed in the importance of the long view. Anakin, on the other hand, was a person of action and instinct. He wanted to solve problems right now, and he often grew frustrated with what he saw as the slow and overly cautious ways of the Jedi. The strict requirements of the way the Jedi lived frequently bumped up against Anakin's naturally emotional nature and his deep, lingering attachments to his past life and the mother he had left behind. These tensions would often bubble to the surface during their missions, like when they were defending a medical station over the planet Felucia, or during a particularly harrowing adventure after their shuttle crashed on Corellia. Despite these clashes, they achieved incredible things together. They rescued Master Plo Koon on the water-covered world of Glee Anselm, showing their ability to operate in diverse environments. They investigated a shocking and scary bombing at the Jedi Temple itself, an event that shook their sense of security and made them realize that even their home wasn't completely safe from the growing unrest in the galaxy. They also served on a long and difficult protection detail on Cato Neimoidia, a mission that would later become the stuff of legend among their peers. Through each of these experiences, their relationship continued to evolve and change. It started to shift from the traditional, formal dynamic of a master and a student into something much more complex and deep. What had started as a very structured teacher-student relationship gradually transformed over the years into a brotherhood. Their fighting styles, once very different, began to complement each other perfectly, like two parts of a single, well-oiled machine. Obi-Wan became a master of defense, a solid wall that was nearly impossible to break, while Anakin's style was aggressive, powerful, and full of unpredictable energy. Together, they created a team that was formidable on any battlefield. They developed a kind of mental shorthand, able to communicate their plans and their movements with just a quick glance or a small gesture. They didn't need words to know what the other was thinking or what their next move would be. Their famous banter, the playful arguing they did, even in the middle of a fight, became legendary among the troops they would eventually lead. It was a way to relieve the tension and to remind each other that they were in this together. As time went on, their joint leadership style became more fluid and natural. They could anticipate each other's moves, finish each other's sentences, and drive each other absolutely crazy in the way that only brothers or very close friends can. Anakin once looked at Obi-Wan and said, "You're the closest thing I have to a father." It was a statement that perfectly captured both the incredible depth of their bond and the complicated nature of their relationship. Obi-Wan was his teacher, his brother, his friend, and in many ways, his parent. Looking back at those years, it is clear that they were laying the groundwork for everything that was to follow. The Council's early concerns about Anakin's emotions never really went away. They were always there, a constant undercurrent of worry. The tensions between Anakin's natural impulses and the strict way of life he was expected to follow remained a challenge. But through it all, despite the arguments and the differences in how they saw the world, Obi-Wan and Anakin forged connection that went far beyond the typical bounds of Jedi training. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the very best teachers are the ones who are still learning things themselves. Obi-Wan may not have felt fully ready to take on an apprentice when he made that promise to his dying master, but his absolute dedication to Anakin's training, his infinite patience in the face of constant challenges, and his willingness to change and adapt his own style all speak to the truly great Jedi Master he was becoming. The bond they formed during these years of peace and early missions would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine by the trials that lay ahead. The galaxy was spiraling toward a massive conflict that would change everything they knew, and the strength of their relationship would be one of the most important factors in the war to come. They were two halves of a whole, prepared to face a future that was growing darker by the day. War has a very powerful and often tragic way of changing people, forcing them to become things they never intended to be. When the Clone Wars finally erupted on the red, dusty plains of Geonosis, it completely transformed the Jedi from their traditional role as guardians of peace and justice into military generals. The members of the Order, who had spent centuries as peacekeepers and scholars, suddenly found themselves leading massive armies into battle. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, a man whose greatest and most effective weapon had always been his sharp mind and his ability to talk his way through a crisis, became one of the Republic's most valuable and respected military assets. He had to trade his quiet life of study and meditation for the noise and chaos of the front lines. His promotion to the rank of High Jedi General came with a set of massive and often overwhelming responsibilities. Obi-Wan took command of the 7th Sky Corps, a large and specialized unit of the Republic's new clone army. It was here that he began working closely with Clone Marshal Commander Cody, a man who would become one of his most trusted and loyal officers. Together, the Jedi and the soldier led the Open Circle Fleet, a powerful task force that brought Republic justice and protection to battlefields scattered across the entire galaxy. But even in the middle of a brutal and exhausting war, Obi-Wan remained true to his core nature. While other generals might have focused purely on winning battles at any cost, he earned a very special nickname among his peers and the enemy, the Negotiator. He earned this by always seeking a peaceful solution first, even when the odds were against it. He brought the foundational principles of the Jedi to his military strategy, often finding clever and unexpected ways to minimize the loss of life on both sides. This approach sometimes frustrated the more aggressive commanders who just wanted to charge ahead, but it saved countless lives and won him the deep respect of the men who served under him. The war tested him in ways that no amount of training in the temple could have prepared him for. On the planet of Christophsis, he and his outnumbered forces held the line against overwhelming odds, buying precious time for the evacuation of civilians who were caught in the crossfire. The liberation of the planet Ryloth showed his tactical brilliance, as he turned what seemed like a completely impossible situation into a hard-fought victory through a combination of stealth and strategy. And his repeated high-stakes clashes with the fearsome and cold General Grievous became the stuff of legend among the clone troopers. Grievous was a terrifying enemy, a cyborg who hunted Jedi for sport, but Obi-Wan faced him with a calm and steady hand every single time. But perhaps the most difficult and exhausting battles weren't the ones fought with lightsabers on the front lines. They were the ones fought in crowded war rooms and quiet council chambers, where Obi-Wan helped to plan the massive operations that would determine the fate of entire star systems. He worked day and night with his clone commanders, developing new tactics that played to the unique and varying strengths of both the Jedi and the clone troopers. His strategies often emphasized the importance of being flexible and being able to adapt to a situation as it changed, traits that served him incredibly well in the unpredictable chaos of war. He learned to trust his soldiers, and they, in turn, learned that their general would never ask them to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. Yet, in the middle of all this galactic conflict, the past had a way of reaching out and catching up with him. Years before the Clone Wars had even begun, Obi-Wan had spent an entire year on the planet Mandalore, protecting Duchess Satine Kryze from a group of violent insurgents and bounty hunters who wanted her dead. They had lived as fugitives during that year, never staying in one place for more than a night, always watching their shadows and sleeping with one eye open. It was a time of great danger, but also a time of deep personal connection. During that year, Satine gave him a nickname that would resurface many years later under very different circumstances: Ben. One particular incident on the world of Draboon always stuck in his memory. They were being attacked by a swarm of venom mites, and in the chaotic rush to escape, Satine was injured. It wasn't a life-threatening injury, and she would later tease him for years about how overprotective and worried he had been, but it left a deep impression on him. That year-long mission ended with the planet of Mandalore being stabilized, but it also left both Obi-Wan and Satine with feelings for each other that they simply couldn't act on. They were both bound by their respective duties, he to the Jedi Order and she to her people and her path of peace. When they were finally reunited during the heat of the Clone Wars, those old buried feelings quickly resurfaced in the middle of new and even more terrifying dangers. A terrorist group of Mandalorian warriors known as Death Watch, who hated Satine's peaceful leadership, began to threaten the stability of the planet. Obi-Wan was sent to investigate their activities and to support Satine's difficult stance of remaining neutral in the wider war between the Republic and the Separatists. But things got very complicated very quickly when they discovered that Governor Pre Vizsla had betrayed her. The lightsaber duel that followed between Obi-Wan and Vizsla, who used an ancient and unique weapon called the Darksaber, was just the start of Mandalore's new troubles. The situation spiraled out of control when Death Watch attacked a peace conference and successfully framed Satine for a murder she didn't commit. As the Republic Senate became more involved in the planet's affairs, Obi-Wan worked tirelessly to uncover a deeper and more sinister conspiracy involving the Separatists. No, the true horror of the situation didn't come until his old thought-dead enemy, Darth Maul, arrived on the scene and orchestrated a violent takeover of the planet. When Satine managed to get a secret transmission out to him, begging for his help, Obi-Wan didn't hesitate for a single second. Even though he didn't have the official permission of the Jedi Council, he took a small ship called the Twilight and launched a desperate rescue mission. But Maul had anticipated his arrival and set a cruel trap in the Mandalorian throne room. Obi-Wan was forced to stand there, held back and helpless, as Maul used the Darksaber to kill Satine right in front of him. It was a moment of absolute heartbreak, a loss that felt as heavy as the loss of his master. If not for the quick thinking of Satine's sister, Bo-Katan, Obi-Wan might have met his own end that day. Despite these intense personal trials and the grief he carried, the larger war across the stars continued to rage on without stopping. Obi-Wan led a daring mission to rescue Master Evan Piel from the Citadel, a high-security prison that was widely thought to be impossible to escape from. He helped to defend the water world of Mon Cala from a massive separatist invasion, and he played a crucial leading role in the difficult campaigns on the dark world of Umbara and the Battle of Anaxes. Each victory he achieved came at a very high cost, and each loss he suffered only served to harden his resolve to see the war through to its end. The final assault on the sinkhole world of Utapau would prove to be one of his very last major engagements of the long and bloody Clone Wars. By that point in time, Obi-Wan Kenobi had become much more than just a general in an army. He had become a symbol of hope for the entire Republic, a master strategist who could turn the tide of a battle not just with his skill with a lightsaber, but with his deep wisdom and his remarkable restraint. The war had changed many things about him and the galaxy, but it had never managed to change his core belief that the very best kind of victory is the one that is achieved without any fighting at all, if possible. Looking back, the Clone Wars were a massive turning point for him and for everyone. The conflict tested loyalties, it broke hearts, and it ultimately reshaped everything the Jedi had sworn to protect. Through all of it, Obi-Wan carried the heavy weight of his command with the same quiet dignity and grace that had marked his entire life, even as the true cost of the war began to hit closer and closer to his own home. While the Clone Wars raged like a fire across the stars, consuming entire systems and turning peaceful worlds into charred battlefields, a much deeper and more dangerous conflict was lurking in the shadows. This was a war of secrets, of whispers in dark corners, and of a mystery that seemed to grow more complex the more the Jedi tried to solve it. Obi-Wan Kenobi found himself right at the center of this shadow war, facing not just endless armies of battle droids, but the very embodiment of the dark side of the Force itself. His first real taste of this darker, more personal war came on the red sands of Geonosis, in a dimly lit and dusty hangar where he first crossed lightsabers with the leader of the Separatists, Count Dooku. That first duel with Dooku was a harsh and painful lesson in humility for Obi-Wan. He was a skilled knight, but Dooku was something else entirely. As a former Jedi Master who had been trained by Yoda himself, Dooku's mastery of the elegant and ancient Makashi form of lightsaber combat was nearly perfect. He moved with a grace and a level of precision that made Obi-Wan's own defenses feel slow and clumsy. The Count cut through those defenses like they weren't even there, wounding both Obi-Wan and Anakin with a cold, detached efficiency. This defeat left more than just physical scars on Obi-Wan's body. It opened his eyes to just how dangerous and sophisticated their new enemy truly was. It was a wake-up call that the peace they had known for so long was truly gone, replaced by a threat that understood the Jedi's own strengths and weaknesses perfectly. During his brief and tense capture and interrogation by Dooku on Geonosis, the Count tried something completely unexpected. Instead of just mocking him, Dooku attempted to recruit Obi-Wan's, revealing fragments of a much larger and more terrifying conspiracy. He claimed that a Sith Lord named Darth Sidious was now in control of the Republic Senate itself, pulling the strings of the entire galaxy from the very heart of the capital. It was a shocking claim, one that felt like a lie, designed to sow doubt and confusion. But even as Dooku dangled these pieces of the truth in front of him, hoping to crack his resolve, Obi-Wan's loyalty to the Republic and the Jedi never wavered for a single second. That steadfast and unbreakable dedication to his principles would become his most important shield against the many temptations of the dark side that would follow in the years to come. As the war progressed, it brought forth new enemies, none of whom were more persistent or frustrating than the mechanical terror known as General Grievous. Their very first meeting set the tone for what would become an epic and long-running rivalry that spanned many years and many systems. Grievous was unlike anything the Jedi had ever faced before. He wasn't a Force user, but he was a terrifyingly efficient Jedi killer. Part living being and part machine, he had been modified to have incredible strength, speed, and the ability to use 4 lightsabers at once with a dizzying, spinning technique. He collected the lightsabers of the Jedi he had killed as trophies, hanging them from his belt as a constant reminder of his lethality. Obi-Wan and Grievous would duel many times across the stars, from the intense and crowded Battle of Hypori to their final and decisive confrontation on the world of Utapau. Where Grievous relied on raw, overwhelming power, intimidation, and mechanical tricks, Obi-Wan relied on something much more sustainable: patience, precision, and a calm mind. He learned to wait for the small openings in the General's aggressive attacks, using his defensive mastery to wear the cyborg down. This patience would serve him equally well in his many complicated encounters with the dark side assassin known as Asajj Ventress. Their first clash on the crystal-covered world of Christophsis showed that they were very evenly matched in skill and determination. What followed was a series of intense encounters, including daring space battles where their ships danced through thick asteroid fields and floating debris with the same level of grace and danger as their lightsaber duels. But war has a strange way of creating alliances that no one would have ever expected. As the conflict grew more desperate and the motivations of their leaders became more questionable, Ventress and Kenobi actually found themselves working together on a few rare occasions against common enemies. When the resurrected Maul and his brother Savage Opress began to threaten the stability of the galaxy, it was Ventress who stepped in to help Obi-Wan, proving that the line between a bitter enemy and an occasional ally isn't always as clear as the Jedi would like to believe. But while these famous battles were being fought in the open for all to see, Obi-Wan was quietly and carefully piecing together a much darker and more confusing puzzle. It had all started with the strange and sudden discovery of the massive clone army on the ocean world of Kamino. Everything about that situation felt wrong to him from the very start. The Jedi Order had never officially ordered this army, yet here it was. Millions of perfectly trained soldiers, ready and waiting for a war that had just begun, exactly when the Republic needed them most. The explanation, provided by the tall elegant Kaminoans that a Jedi Master named Sifo Dyas had commissioned the army in secret before his death, only raised more questions than it answered. Who had really paid for the army? Why had the records of Kamino been erased from the Jedi archives? As Obi-Wan dug deeper and deeper into the mystery, he began to track the shadow of the elusive Darth Sidious, the phantom puppet master who seemed to be pulling the strings of both the Republic and the Separatists from the darkness. His investigation led him through a confusing maze of conspiracies, half-truths, and dead ends. He followed every lead, no matter how small, trying to find the source of the rot that was eating away at the foundations of the galaxy. One of the most tragic and telling moments of this investigation came when a clone trooper named Fives began to act strangely. Fives had discovered something terrible, a hidden organic chip inside the brains of every single clone, a piece of technology that could force them to obey any order without question, even in order to turn against their own Jedi generals. Fives tried desperately to warn Obi-Wan and Anakin about this hidden programming, but he was framed as a madman and a traitor. Before he could fully explain the danger, he was killed. Obi-Wan began to look at the clones with a new sense of unease, and his suspicions about the political leaders on Coruscant grew. He started to look at Chancellor Palpatine with new eyes, noticing how the man seemed to always benefit from every new development in the war. The pieces were all right there, waiting to be put together. The suspicious timing of the clone army's discovery, the convenient emergency powers that were constantly being granted to the Chancellor by a frightened Senate, and the way the war seemed designed to go on forever, draining the resources and the spirit of the Republic. But seeing the whole complete picture proved to be maddeningly difficult for the Jedi. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. The dark side of the Force had grown so thick and heavy over Coruscant that it clouded the vision of even the most powerful masters, making it impossible to see the plain truth until it was far too late to change anything. Through all of these intense confrontations and disturbing discoveries, Obi-Wan never lost his inner center. He remained the steady rock that the Order needed. Where Dooku had fallen to the empty promises of power, where Grievous had given himself over to hatred and mechanical coldness, and where Ventress walked the difficult line between light and dark, Kenobi remained fixed in the light. His true strength wasn't found in his raw power or his military victories, but in his unwavering and total commitment to the Jedi principles and the light side of the Force. He was the one who could be trusted to do the right thing, even when the right thing was the hardest path to take. The final and climactic confrontation with General Grievous on the world of Utapau should have felt like a massive victory for the Republic. After years of a deadly cat-and-mouse game across the stars, Obi-Wan finally managed to corner and defeat the cyborg general in a brutal fight. With Grievous gone, the Separatist droid army was effectively leaderless, and it seemed like the war might finally be coming to an end. But as Obi-Wan stood there on the landing platform, he didn't feel the relief he had expected. Instead, he felt a growing sense of dread. The presence of the dark side hadn't grown weaker with the death of the enemy general. If anything, it felt stronger and more suffocating than ever before. All of those years of battles, all of those long investigations, and all of the many hints and clues he had followed were leading to something much bigger and much more terrible than a simple military defeat. The Sith hadn't just returned to the galaxy. They had never really left. They had spent 1,000 years planning their revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike a blow that would destroy the Jedi once and for all. As Obi-Wan prepared to send his final report to the capital about the defeat of Grievous, he couldn't have known that the real final confrontation with the dark side was just beginning. The shadow he had been chasing for so long was about to reveal itself in a way that would shatter the Republic, destroy his world, and transform his relationship with the person he trusted and loved most in the world. Victory in the world of the Jedi can change into a horrific tragedy in the mere blink of an eye. One moment, Obi-Wan stood triumphant on Utapau, having completed a mission that many thought was impossible. The next moment, the entire world turned upside down. Without any warning or any sign of hesitation, his own loyal troops, men he had fought beside and trusted with his life for years, turned their weapons against him. Commander Cody, the man who had been his right hand through the most difficult days of the war, received a message and gave the order without a second thought. Execute Order 66. The massive blast from an ATTE walker sent Obi-Wan and his loyal Veractyl mount, Boga, plummeting down into the dark, water-filled depths of a massive cavern. It was only by pure luck, or perhaps the will of the Force itself, that he survived the incredible fall. As the clone troopers above watched the water, assuming their general was dead, Obi-Wan managed to pull himself out and make a silent escape in Grievous's own starfighter. His mind was racing, filled with questions that had no easy answers. Why had the clones turned? Was this happening everywhere? What had happened to Anakin? He soon realized he wasn't the only one who had survived the initial slaughter. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, a man of great courage and a true friend to the Jedi, had helped Master Yoda escape from the capital after the clones there had turned as well. When the survivors finally reunited aboard Bail's ship, the true and staggering scale of the disaster began to emerge from the shadows. The clone troopers hadn't just had a local disagreement with their generals. They had turned on every single Jedi in every corner of the galaxy at exactly the same time. It was a perfectly executed plan of total extermination. But as terrible as the mass murder of the Jedi was, the worst part for Obi-Wan was yet to come. When he and Yoda returned to the ruins of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, hoping to find survivors or a way to stop the madness, they found only silence, smoke, and the bodies of their friends. Obi-Wan went to the security recordings, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened, and he saw a story so horrible that he could barely process the images. There, on the flickering blue hologram, was Anakin, his brother, his student, the boy he had raised. Anakin was leading a legion of clone troopers through the sacred halls of the temple, not fighting them, but leading them in the slaughter. He saw Anakin striking down the younglings, the innocent children who had looked up to him as a hero and a protector. Obi-Wan's hands shook with a cold, deep grief as he recorded a final, desperate warning message to be broadcast to any Jedi who might still be alive out there in the stars. He told them to stay away, that the war was over, and that the temple was now a deadly trap. But even as he did his duty, a part of his heart simply couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. This couldn't be the same Anakin he had known. There had to be some other explanation, some kind of mind control or a terrible mistake. He refused to believe that the boy with the bright eyes from Tatooine could become this monster. When Padme Amidala, Anakin's secret wife and a woman of incredible strength, prepared to leave for the volcanic world of Mustafar to confront him, Obi-Wan made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He stowed away on her ship, hidden in the shadows. He had to see for himself. He had to know the truth of what had happened to his friend. But what he witnessed on that burning, hellish world shattered any lingering hope he might have been holding on to. The man who stood before them on the landing platform wasn't Anakin anymore. His eyes were a sickly yellow, filled with a burning hatred and an insatiable lust for power. When Padme begged him to come back to the light, to walk away from this path of darkness and death, Anakin responded with a cold and terrifying anger. As Obi-Wan watched in absolute horror, Anakin used the Force to choke the woman he had once claimed to love above everything else in the universe. In that terrible moment, Obi-Wan finally accepted the truth he had been trying so hard to ignore. His apprentice, his brother, was truly gone. He had been replaced by something else, a servant of the dark side who now went by the name Darth Vader. The duel that followed between the former master and the fallen apprentice was a battle of such intensity and sorrow that it would be told and retold for generations to come. They fought through the massive mining facility, their lightsabers cutting through heavy metal and solid stone like they were nothing. The fight carried them out over the literal rivers of molten lava, leaping from one floating, unstable platform to another, as the very planet itself seemed to be tearing apart in a fit of rage around them. They were both masters of their craft, and they knew each other's moves so well that for a long time, it seemed like neither could gain the upper hand. The words they spoke during the fight cut deeper than any lightsaber blade ever could. "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." Obi-Wan cried out, his voice filled with a raw and agonizing anguish that echoed across the burning landscape of the planet. But Vader was far beyond the reach of love or reason. He was consumed by his own rage and the lies of the Sith. From his position on the higher ground of a black sand slope, Obi-Wan begged Anakin not to try to leap, knowing that it was a move that could only end in tragedy. But Vader, blinded by his own arrogance and hatred, leaped anyway. In one swift and terrible moment, it was all over. Obi-Wan's blade severed Vader's remaining natural limbs, leaving him to fall and burn on the shores of the lava river. The screams of pain and fury that came from his former friend would echo in Obi-Wan's nightmares for the rest of his years. Even after everything that had happened, he couldn't bring himself to deliver a final killing blow to the man he had once loved like a brother. Instead, he did the only thing he could do. He picked up Anakin's fallen lightsaber and walked away, leaving his former apprentice to a fate that seemed much worse than a quick death. He felt as though a part of his own soul had been left behind on those burning shores. Racing against time and the arrival of the Emperor, Obi-Wan transported the unconscious and dying Padme to the medical facility at Polis Massa. There, in a quiet place far from the chaos that was consuming the rest of the galaxy, she gave birth to twins, a boy named Luke and a girl named Leia. With her very last breath, she looked at Obi-Wan and insisted that there was still good left in Anakin. Then she was gone, leaving Obi-Wan and the few remaining allies with an almost impossible burden. They had to decide how to protect these two innocent children from the dark legacy of their father. The decision to separate the twins wasn't made lightly, but it was the only way to keep them hidden from the Emperor's reach. Bail Organa volunteered to adopt Leia, giving her a loving home and a life of purpose on the beautiful planet of Alderaan. For the boy Luke, it was decided that he would go to live with his aunt and uncle, Beru and Owen Lars, on the familiar sands of Tatooine. And Obi-Wan made a decision for his own future. He would go to Tatooine as well. He would watch over the boy from a distance, becoming a silent guardian and a protector for the child who represented the last hope of the Jedi and the galaxy. As Obi-Wan prepared himself for a long and lonely exile in the desert, he carried much more than just the physical weight of Anakin's lightsaber. He carried the crushing weight of what felt like 1,000 different failures. He felt that he had failed the Jedi Order, failed the Republic he had sworn to protect, and failed the trust that Qui-Gon Jinn had placed in him all those years ago. But most of all, he felt that he had failed Anakin. He had watched the bright-eyed, hopeful boy from the desert turn into a monster, and he couldn't help but wonder every single day if he could have done something differently to prevent it. The galaxy was now entering its darkest hour, a time of fear, oppression, and silence. The Republic had officially fallen, replaced by a galactic empire built on a foundation of hatred and absolute control. The Jedi, once the proud guardians of the peace, were now almost entirely extinct, hunted down to the last few survivors. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the new empire, a man in a suit of terrifying black armor drew his first mechanical breaths, a twisted, cold shadow of the hero he had once been. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the long and bloody years of the Clone Wars had ended not with a grand parade of victory, but with a long, quiet walk into the vast and lonely desert, carrying with him the tiny, flickering spark of hope for a future he might never live to see. The transition from a famous war hero and a respected high general to a lonely hermit living in the middle of nowhere was not an easy one. It required a level of patience and mental strength that even a Jedi Master would find challenging. The desert of Tatooine is a place that can break a person's spirit with its heat, its isolation, and its endless shifting sands. But Obi-Wan didn't go there to hide from the world out of fear. He went there with a very clear and vital mission. He was the watcher on the horizon, the man who would ensure that the darkness never touched the child who was growing up on the Lars Moisture farm. To the few people he occasionally encountered in the small trading outposts or at the distant wells, he was no longer Obi-Wan Kenobi. He became simply Ben, a name that felt comfortable and unassuming. It was a name that helped him distance himself from the man he had been during the war, the man whose face had been on screens across the galaxy. He chose his small, humble home in the Jundland Wastes very carefully. It was a simple dwelling, carved into the rock, but it provided him with a clear and unobstructed view of the Lars homestead in the distance. Every day, he would look out across the shimmering heat of the desert, making sure that Luke was safe and that no Imperial eyes had found their way to this remote corner of the galaxy. But even in his isolation, Obi-Wan wasn't completely alone in the way a normal person would be. In the absolute quiet of the desert nights, under the light of the two moons, he practiced the deep meditation techniques he had been taught. He learned how to reach out across the boundaries of life and death to communicate with the spirit of his old master, Qui-Gon Jinn. It was through these long, ethereal conversations that he began to study the ancient and profound techniques of the wills, deepening his personal connection to the Force in ways that the traditional training at the Jedi Temple had never explored. He was becoming a different kind of Jedi, one who understood the Force not just as a tool for battle, but as a vast and living mystery that transcended the physical world. He also had to learn the practical skills of survival in one of the harshest environments in the galaxy. He learned the patterns of the weather, the locations of the hidden water sources, and the behaviors of the many dangerous creatures that called the desert home. He even learned how to perfectly imitate the terrifying and bone-chilling call of a crate dragon, a trick that would prove to be incredibly useful more than once when he needed to scare off attackers without revealing who he really was. Life as a hermit didn't mean he was completely cut off from the struggles of the people around him, however. When a massive and devastating drought hit the region, threatening the lives of the local moisture farmers, Obi-Wan quietly and secretly helped them. He would use his skills to defend them from those who would try to steal their precious water supplies. He didn't hesitate to confront the violent thugs sent by Jabba the Hutt when they pushed their protection rackets too far and began to hurt innocent people. When a group of Tusken Raiders looted the Lars family's essential moisture vaporators, he intervened carefully, finding a way to get the equipment back without causing a wider conflict. He worked hard to build a delicate and respectful relationship with both the human farmers and the Sand People, acting as a quiet mediator in a world that often only understood violence. He even became involved in the small everyday affairs of a trading outpost known as Danar's Claim, where he worked alongside a respected Tusken leader named Sharad Het. These small, carefully chosen interventions helped him to build a reputation among the locals as a mysterious but fundamentally benevolent figure. He was the man you might go to if you were in real trouble and had nowhere else to turn, but he was also a man who clearly preferred to be left alone with his thoughts. Young Luke Skywalker was never far from his mind or his sight. From his hidden vantage points on the rocky cliffs, Obi-Wan watched the boy grow from a toddler into a young man. He saw Luke learning how to pilot a T-16 Skyhopper, and he could see the same natural, incredible skill that his father had once possessed. Sometimes when a mechanical problem would ground the boy's ship and the family couldn't afford the expensive replacement parts, those parts would mysteriously appear on their doorstep in the middle of the night, though no one could ever say where they had come from or who had brought them. It was a way for Obi-Wan to help the boy without ever making his presence truly known. But this constant, watchful protection caused a great deal of tension with Owen Lars. Luke's uncle was a good man, a hard-working man, but he was also a man who was deeply afraid. He had only agreed to take the boy in on the strict condition that Obi-Wan keep his distance. Owen feared that any connection to the Jedi or the Force would only bring danger down on their heads, or even worse, lead Luke down the same dark and tragic path that his father had taken. Owen wanted Luke to be a farmer, to stay on the ground, and to never even look at the stars. Their fundamental disagreements about what was best for Luke created a deep rift between the two men, a conflict that would never be fully resolved. The quiet of his exile was occasionally broken by the echoes of his past life. When word reached him through the secret networks of the galaxy that a former Jedi student named Ferrus Olin had been captured by the Empire's terrifying Inquisitors, Obi-Wan made the difficult decision to briefly leave his post on Tatooine to mount a rescue. It was a massive and calculated risk, one that could have revealed his location to the Emperor, but it was a risk he felt he had to take. He couldn't just stand by and let another soul be lost to the darkness if he had the power to prevent it. He knew that not all of his former friends and colleagues had been as lucky or as skilled at hiding as he had been. His most dangerous and personal confrontation during these long years of exile came when Maul, the former Sith who had been obsessed with him for decades, finally tracked him down to the deserts of Tatooine. The arrival of a young and hopeful Force user named Ezra Bridger during this time only complicated matters further, but it also showed Obi-Wan that a new and brave generation was finally rising up to fight back against the Empire. When Maul finally found him in the vast, empty desert, their final duel was nothing like the long acrobatic fights of their youth. This time, Obi-Wan took a very specific and meaningful stance. The same one that Qui-Gon Jinn had used in their very first battle on Naboo so many years before. Maul, still consumed by decades of pure hatred and a need for revenge, attacked with the same aggressive moves he had always used. But Obi-Wan was no longer the impulsive young man from the Generator Complex. He was a master of himself in the Force. In 3 precise, calm, and final moves, the long conflict between them was finally over. As Maul lay dying in his arms, they spoke not as bitter enemies, but as 2 tired men who had both been shaped and broken by the same tragic galactic events. Their final conversation turned to the Chosen One, and despite everything that had gone wrong, Obi-Wan still held on to his hope for the future. In a final act of profound respect, he built a funeral pyre for his old enemy, watching the flames rise into the cold desert night. His days on the planet eventually settled into a predictable and quiet pattern. He would watch the Lars homestead from afar, making sure that no Imperial investigations or bounty hunters ever came too close to the boy. He maintained his carefully built image as a simple, slightly eccentric hermit, while secretly keeping the combat and Force skills that had made him one of the greatest Jedi Masters sharp and ready for the day he knew would eventually come. He became a true student of the desert itself, learning to live in harmony with its rhythms and its many hidden dangers. The local people told many stories and shared many rumors about Old Ben. Some people said he was a veteran of a long-forgotten war who had seen too much. Others claimed he was a wandering mystic or a man who had lost his mind in the heat. A very few even whispered in secret that he might be one of the legendary surviving Jedi. But no one really knew for sure, and Ben never made any effort to correct the stories. His true identity, like so much of the history of the Jedi, remained buried deep beneath the shifting red sands of the desert. These long years of exile weren't just about hiding or staying safe, they were about the difficult practice of patience. They were about keeping one's faith alive when it seemed like everything good in the world had been lost forever. The galaxy had entered its darkest and most oppressive time, but Obi-Wan Kenobi held on to something very precious: hope. He had hope that one day, the young boy he was watching grow up on a lonely moisture farm would find his own path and help to bring balance back to the Force. He had hope that the light would one day return to the galaxy, and he had hope that his long, lonely vigil would not be in vain. He was waiting for the right moment, the moment when the Force would signal that it was time to move again. After nearly 20 long, silent years of watching the twin suns rise and set over the endless dunes of the desert, after nearly 2 decades of waiting for a sign that the time for hiding was finally over, a simple, holographic message changed the course of history. It wasn't a grand proclamation from a senate or a loud declaration of war, but the flickering blue image of a young woman in distress. "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope." These words, spoken with a desperate but steady courage by Princess Leia Organa, were the spark that finally brought Obi-Wan out of the long shadows of the Jundland Wastes and back into the center of the fight against the iron grip of the Empire. The quiet life of the hermit was about to end, and the final chapter of a legend was about to begin. The chain of events that led to this moment began far above the surface of Tatooine, in the cold vacuum of space, where a small rebel ship carrying Princess Leia was intercepted by a massive and terrifying Imperial Star Destroyer. It was a lopsided battle, one that could only end in the capture of the vessel. In a move of incredible quickness and foresight, Leia hid the stolen plans for the Empire's ultimate and most terrifying weapon, a massive space station known as the Death Star, inside the memory banks of a small, brave astromech droid named R2-D2. Along with his constant companion, a Golden Protocol droid called C-3PO, R2-D2 escaped in a small pod to the planet below. They were carrying the only information that could possibly save the galaxy from total destruction, and they were heading straight toward the one man who could help them. Fate has a very strange and poetic way of connecting the dots across the stars. These two droids, lost and wandering in the vast, scorching deserts of Tatooine, were eventually picked up by a group of Jawa scavengers. These Jawas, looking for a quick profit, took them to the nearest farm to sell them. By a turn of events that could only be explained as the work of the Force itself, they were sold to Owen Lars, the very same moisture farmer who was raising Luke Skywalker. The plans were now in the hands of the boy Obi-Wan had spent half a lifetime protecting. It was as if the universe was finally alignment, bringing all the pieces of the puzzle together in one place. When Luke was cleaning the new droids later that evening, he accidentally triggered a fragment of Leia's hidden message. His curiosity was immediately sparked by the sight of the beautiful princess and the name she spoke. Who was Obi-Wan Kenobi? Was he related to the strange old hermit who lived out beyond the Dune Sea? But it was R2-D2's sudden and secret escape into the dangerous night that truly set things in motion. Luke, fearing his uncle's anger and worried about the expensive droid, pursued R2 into the treacherous canyons of the Jundland Wastes the next morning. It was there, in the narrow and rocky passages, that Luke found himself ambushed and knocked unconscious by a group of aggressive Tusken Raiders. Just when things looked at their absolute bleakest for the young farm boy, a chilling, high-pitched howl echoed through the rocky canyons. It was a sound so strange and terrifying that the raiders, usually brave and fierce, scrambled away in fear, thinking a massive crate dragon was coming for them. But it wasn't a dragon at all. It was Obi-Wan Kenobi, using a clever vocal trick he had perfected over his many years of living in the desert. For the very first time in his life, Luke met the mysterious man he had only heard stories about. This was the man who had been watching him from the shadows for 19 years, the silent guardian who was now stepping into the light to guide him toward his destiny. Back at Obi-Wan's small and humble home, the full and complete message from Princess Leia was finally played for them to see. She begged Obi-Wan to deliver the stolen plans to her father, Bail Organa, on their home planet of Alderaan. She reminded him of his many years of loyal service to her father during the Clone Wars, a time that felt like ancient history to someone as young as Luke. It was in that moment, in that small room filled with the smell of sand and old herbs, that Obi-Wan did something he had been waiting nearly 2 decades to do. He stood up, went to an old wooden chest, and pulled out a slender silver handle. It was a lightsaber, the elegant and powerful weapon of a Jedi Knight. Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough, he told Luke, holding out the weapon. For the first time in his entire life, Luke began to hear the truth about his father. He wasn't just a navigator on a spice freighter, as his uncle had always claimed. He was a heroic Jedi Knight who had fought with distinction in the grand battles of the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan didn't tell Luke everything that day. He knew the boy wasn't ready for the full, crushing weight of the truth. Instead, he explained that a former pupil of his named Darth Vader had betrayed the Jedi and murdered Luke's father. It was a statement that was true from a certain point of view. The good and noble man who had been Anakin Skywalker had indeed been destroyed when he gave himself over to the dark side and became Vader. During this conversation, Obi-Wan also introduced the young man to the fundamental concept of the Force. He described it not as a magical power, but as a living energy field that is created by all living things in the galaxy. He explained how it surrounds us, how it penetrates into every part of existence, and how it binds the entire galaxy together into one single, connected whole. He invited Luke to leave his farm life behind and join him on this mission to Alderaan. He wanted Luke to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi, just like his father before him. But Luke, torn between his deep desire for adventure and his sense of responsibility to his aunt and uncle, hesitated. He felt he couldn't just walk away from his home, even for something as important as this. It wasn't until Luke returned to the farm and found the homestead in smoking ruins that his path was finally and irrevocably chosen for him. The Imperial stormtroopers, hunting for the droids and the stolen plans, had tracked them to the farm and killed Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. With his home gone and nothing left to hold him to the red sands of Tatooine, Luke's hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold resolve. He agreed to go with Obi-Wan, taking his first tentative and frightening step into a much larger and more dangerous world than he had ever imagined. They needed a way off the planet, and they needed it quickly, before the Empire could lock down the entire system. Their journey took them to the sprawling and dusty Mos Eisley spaceport, a place that Obi-Wan described with a warning as a wretched hive of scum and villainy. It was a city filled with criminals, smugglers, and those who wanted to disappear. When they were stopped at an Imperial checkpoint by a squad of stormtroopers, Luke got his very first-hand look at the incredible power of the Force. With a simple, graceful wave of his hand and a calm, commanding tone, Obi-Wan spoke the words, "These aren't the droids you're looking for." He used the Force to cloud the minds of the weak-willed troopers, allowing them to pass through the gates completely unhindered. It was a demonstration of the wisdom and subtle power that the Jedi were famous for, the ability to resolve a conflict without ever having to draw a weapon. Inside the dark and crowded Mos Eisley Cantina, a place pulsing with strange music and filled with the many different species of the galaxy, Obi-Wan was forced to demonstrate a different and more violent kind of power. When a belligerent and scarred criminal named Dr. Evazan and his partner Ponda Baba began to threaten and harass Luke, Obi-Wan tried to settle the matter peacefully at first. But when the thugs drew their blasters, his lightsaber flashed out in the dim light of the bar. In just a few seconds, the confrontation was over and the attackers were neutralized. It was a sudden and sharp glimpse of the warrior who had once been known as the Great Negotiator, showing that while he preferred peace, he was still more than capable of handling himself in a fight. They needed a ship that was fast enough to outrun the Imperial blockades, and Obi-Wan's search led him to a skeptical and arrogant smuggler named Han Solo and his tall, hairy Wookiee co-pilot Chewbacca. Han was a man who didn't believe in the Force or ancient religions, preferring to trust in a good blaster at his side and the speed of his ship, the Millennium Falcon. Despite the friction between the old Jedi and the young smuggler, they managed to strike a deal. Obi-Wan promised a massive payment of 17,000 credits if Han could get them safely to Alderaan. It was a steep price, but time was of the essence. As they lifted off from the spaceport, narrowly escaping a hail of blaster fire from the pursuing Imperial troops, Obi-Wan might have allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. After nearly 20 years of waiting, he was finally back in the fight, doing what he was meant to do. But the galaxy they were entering was far more dangerous than the one Obi-Wan remembered from the old days. During the journey through hyperspace, Obi-Wan began Luke's very first formal training session. He had the boy practice with a small, hovering remote droid, teaching him how to use his lightsaber to deflect incoming energy bolts. But he didn't want Luke to rely on his eyes. He had the boy put on a helmet with the blast shield down, forcing him to rely entirely on his feelings and his connection to the Force. "Your eyes can deceive you," he warned. "Don't trust them." He was teaching Luke how to listen to the universe around him, to sense the flow of energy before a strike even happened. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates for Alderaan, they were met with a sight that was more horrific than anything they could have imagined. Instead of a beautiful green planet, they found only a massive and silent field of debris and broken rock. The entire world, along with its millions of people and the royal family, had been completely destroyed. Obi-Wan felt a massive disturbance in the Force, describing it as millions of voices suddenly crying out in terror and then being suddenly silenced. Before they could even begin to process this unimaginable tragedy, they saw what appeared to be a small moon nearby. But as they got closer, they realized the terrifying truth. It was no moon. It was the Death Star, the very station whose plans they were carrying. The Millennium Falcon was caught in a powerful tractor beam and pulled helplessly into one of the massive space station's docking bays. Once they were inside and hidden in the ship's secret smuggling compartments, Obi-Wan realized that they were in the heart of the enemy's power. He knew that the only way for them to escape was for someone to disable the tractor beam from the inside. He took on this most dangerous part of the mission himself, leaving the others to hide, while he moved through the corridors of the station like a ghost. He used every bit of his Jedi training, moving with a level of stealth and focus that allowed him to bypass squads of stormtroopers and security sensors without being detected. The years spent in the quiet desert hadn't dulled his physical abilities or his connection to the Force. If anything, the isolation had refined his skills to a razor-sharp edge. He moved with a sense of purpose and calm that was unshakable. With a combination of mechanical knowledge and Force-guided precision, he reached the power control terminal and successfully deactivated the tractor beam, clearing the path for the Falcon to escape. But as he began to make his way back toward the docking bay, he sensed a presence that he hadn't felt in nearly 20 years. It was a cold, dark, and familiar presence that chilled him to his core. Darth Vader, his former apprentice and his greatest failure, was waiting for him. Master and former student met in a wide, gray corridor of the station, their lightsabers igniting with a familiar hum. One blue, one red. The duel that followed was very different from their fiery and emotional confrontation on the shores of the lava river on Mustafar so many years before. This was a much more measured and deliberate exchange. Two masters of the art testing each other's defenses and looking for any small weakness. Vader was more powerful than he had been, his mechanical body giving him a level of strength that was hard to match, but Obi-Wan was at peace. He wasn't fighting for revenge or out of anger. He was fighting to give the others the time they needed to get away. As they circled each other, their blades clashing and sending sparks flying into the air, Obi-Wan caught a glimpse of Luke, Leia, Han, and the others making their way toward the Millennium Falcon. He saw the future of the Jedi and the hope of the rebellion in that young boy's eyes. In that critical moment, Obi-Wan made his final and most important decision. He looked at Vader and said, "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." He then raised his lightsaber in a gesture of peace and closed his eyes, centering himself in the Force one last time. Vader didn't hesitate. He struck a killing blow with his red blade. As the lightsaber passed through Obi-Wan's neck and chest, something impossible and miraculous happened. Obi-Wan's physical body didn't fall to the floor. Instead, it simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only his empty brown robes and his lightsaber to fall to the cold metal ground. He had achieved the ultimate mastery of the Force, becoming one with the energy of the universe in the very moment of his death. Luke, watching from across the hangar, cried out in shock and grief, but he didn't have time to mourn. He heard Obi-Wan's voice echoing in his mind, clear and steady, "Run, Luke, run!" The final physical adventure of Obi-Wan Kenobi had come to an end in the heart of the enemy's fortress, but his influence on the galaxy and the fate of the Jedi was far from over. He had sacrificed his life so that the next generation could live, and he had found a way to transcend death itself. As the Millennium Falcon accelerated away from the Death Star and into the safety of hyperspace, the spirit of the old master remained with them, a silent guide through the darkness that was yet to come. He had passed the torch to Luke, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The man was gone, but the legend was just beginning to take its final, most powerful form. Death, for a Jedi who has truly understood the nature of the Force, is rarely ever the final end of their story. For those who have dedicated their entire lives to the service of the light and have made a lasting, positive impact on the galaxy, it is more like turning a page in a very long book. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the moment of his physical death was actually a moment of transformation. In the second when Vader's blade should have ended his existence, Obi-Wan became more powerful than his former apprentice could ever possibly imagine. Those many years he had spent in the desert, communicating with the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn, had finally paid off. He had mastered a skill that no other Jedi in recorded history had ever managed to achieve: the ability to keep his individual consciousness after the death of the body. The first clear sign that Obi-Wan's guidance would continue to shape events came during the desperate and high-stakes rebel attack on the Death Star. As Luke Skywalker flew his X-Wing down the narrow and dangerous surface trench, with the fate of the entire rebellion resting on his ability to hit a tiny exhaust port with a pair of torpedoes, he was struggling. He was being chased by Vader himself, and his targeting computer was failing him. It was in that moment of absolute pressure and fear that he heard a voice that was both familiar and comforting. "Use the Force, Luke." In that critical second, with the lives of thousands of people hanging in the balance, Luke decided to trust his mentor's voice over the technology of his ship. He switched off his targeting computer, closed his eyes, and reached out with his feelings just as Obi-Wan had taught him on the Falcon. He felt the flow of the Force, he sensed the right moment to fire, and he successfully destroyed the massive station. It was the very first lesson that Obi-Wan was able to teach from beyond the physical world: the importance of trusting in the living energy of the universe over the machines and gadgets of the material world. It was a victory for the light side as much as it was a victory for the rebellion. Luke wouldn't see the spectral form of his master again for several years, until he was on the icy and frozen wastes of the planet Hoth. After being attacked by a savage Wampa and nearly freezing to death in a massive snowstorm, Luke was at the very end of his strength. It was then that Obi-Wan's glowing blue form appeared to him in the swirling snow. He gave Luke a new and vital direction, telling him to go to the remote Dagobah system. There, Luke would find Master Yoda, the same ancient and wise Jedi who had trained Obi-Wan himself so many years before. This guidance wasn't a random suggestion. Obi-Wan knew that Luke needed far more training than he had been able to give him during their short time together. Yoda was the last great teacher of the old ways, and he was the only one who could truly prepare Luke for the challenges that were coming. Throughout Luke's training on the swampy world of Dagobah, Obi-Wan continued to serve as an essential bridge between the old generation of the Jedi and the new. He was often there in spirit, discussing Luke's progress with Yoda and offering his own insights. When Luke impulsively decided to cut his training short and leave the planet to try and save his friends who were being held in Cloud City, both Yoda and Obi-Wan warned him of the extreme danger. They knew that Luke wasn't ready to face the darkness yet. "If you choose to face Vader, you will do it alone," Obi-Wan told him with a heavy heart. "I cannot interfere." This wasn't because he didn't want to help the boy he cared for. It was because the very nature of his new spiritual existence came with strict limitations. He could guide and he could advise, but the physical struggle and the ultimate choices had to belong to Luke alone. The most difficult and painful moment between the master and his student came after Luke's devastating duel with Vader on Bespin. Learning the soul-shattering truth that the monster in the black armor was actually his father had shaken Luke to his very core. When he eventually returned to Dagobah and confronted the spirit of Obi-Wan about why he had been lied to, why he had been told that Vader murdered his father, Obi-Wan gave his now famous certain point of view explanation. He explained that from a spiritual and moral perspective, the good and noble man who had been Anakin Skywalker had indeed been destroyed and replaced when he became Darth Vader. It wasn't the whole literal truth, but it reflected Obi-Wan's genuine and deeply held belief about what had actually happened to the soul of his former apprentice. He saw the man and the monster as two entirely different beings. In that same deep and honest conversation, Obi-Wan revealed the final and most closely guarded secret he had been keeping for all those years. He told Luke that he had a twin sister, and that the woman was none other than Leia Organa. He explained how the twins had been separated at birth to protect them from the Emperor's sight, hidden in places where Vader would never think to look for them. This revelation finally completed the full circle of the truth about Luke's family and his heritage, though it came much later than it perhaps should have. It gave Luke a new sense of purpose and a new reason to believe that there was still hope for his family. After the death of Master Yoda on Dagobah, Obi-Wan appeared to Luke one last time to offer his final words of wisdom. He reiterated that he couldn't help in the physical fight. "You must face him on your own," he explained. But even as he set these necessary boundaries, Obi-Wan was carefully preparing Luke for the most important challenge of his life. He knew that the ultimate fate of the galaxy wouldn't depend on how well Luke could swing a lightsaber or how many TIE fighters he could shoot down. It would depend entirely on Luke's faith. His faith that there was still a spark of good left deep inside his father, and his belief that anyone, no matter how far they have fallen, is capable of redemption. During the climactic Battle of Endor, as the rebellion fought a desperate battle to destroy the second Death Star, Luke went to face both Vader and the Emperor alone. In those most desperate and lonely hours, Luke didn't have Obi-Wan's visible, glowing form there to guide him, but the many lessons that Obi-Wan had taught him over the years were all there, buried deep in his heart. He remembered the lessons about compassion, about the power of the light, and about the importance of making the right choice even when it's the hardest one. When Luke finally threw away his lightsaber and refused to kill his father, he wasn't just rejecting the Emperor's darkness. He was fully embracing Obi-Wan's final and most important teaching, that violence is never the true answer, and that compassion and love are more powerful than any weapon. When Anakin Skywalker finally did return to the light, sacrificing his own life to save his son and destroy the evil Emperor, he fulfilled the ancient prophecy of the Chosen One in a way that neither he nor Obi-Wan could have ever possibly foreseen during the war. Balance was finally brought back to the Force, and it didn't come through the destruction of the Sith in battle, but through a final, selfless act of redemptive love. After his death, the spirit of Anakin was able to join the spirits of Obi-Wan and Yoda. During the great celebration on the moon of Endor, as the galaxy cheered the fall of the Empire, the three spirits appeared to Luke. The Master and the Apprentice, separated by darkness and tragedy for so long, were finally and fully reunited in the light of the Force. The journey that had begun on the red sands of Tatooine so many years before had finally come to a beautiful and peaceful conclusion. But the influence of Obi-Wan Kenobi didn't end with the fall of the Empire. Over the many years that followed, as Luke struggled with the massive task of rebuilding the Jedi Order from the ground up, the spirit of his old master continued to appear to him from time to time to offer guidance and support. Their long conversations helped to shape Luke's new Jedi philosophy, which differed in several very important ways from the rigid and often cold lifestyle of the Old Order. Obi-Wan had seen firsthand how the blindness, the emotional detachment, and the excessive focus on rules had contributed to the downfall of the original Jedi. His own painful experiences gave Luke the permission he needed to chart a different and more compassionate course for the future of the Jedi. There are even ancient accounts and stories of Obi-Wan appearing to Leia in the years after the war, though these visits were not as frequent as his appearances to Luke. These brief manifestations helped her to understand her own secret connection to the Force and the complicated legacy she shared with her brother. Often, Obi-Wan would appear alongside the spirit of Yoda, the two old masters working together to guide and advise the new generation of heroes, just as they had done during the dark days of the Clone Wars. They were the keepers of the history and the wisdom of the past, ensuring that the mistakes of the Old Order would never be repeated again. One of the final and most important lessons that Obi-Wan passed on to Luke was something he had learned during his long, lonely years of exile on Tatooine: the absolute importance of caring for individual people. He had realized that the old Jedi Order had become far too focused on the big picture of galactic politics and grand schemes, and in doing so, they had lost sight of the very individuals they were supposed to be protecting. Obi-Wan's time spent watching over a single boy on a moisture farm had taught him the infinite value of a single life, a lesson that he made sure to pass on to his very last student. He wanted the new Jedi to be guardians of the people, not just generals in a war. In so many different and profound ways, the story of Obi-Wan Kenobi defies our usual and limited understanding of what it means to live and to die. His influence on the galaxy didn't stop, but actually grew stronger after his physical form had vanished on the Death Star. Through his steady guidance of Luke Skywalker, through the many lessons he imparted about the nature of the Force, and through the quiet, brave example he set with his own life, Obi-Wan helped to shape the entire future of the galaxy. The boy from the small planet of Stewjon, the apprentice who struggled with his rules, the general who led armies, and the hermit who watched from the shadows, had found a way to continue serving the light even from beyond the veil of death. If we take a moment to look at the full, incredible span of his long life, what emerges is a beautiful portrait of a man who never once stopped learning and never once stopped trying to do better. He faced levels of failure, grief, and loss that would have easily broken many other people. He had watched his master die in his arms, he had watched his best friend and brother fall into the deepest darkness, he had seen his entire order destroyed, and he had seen his beloved republic turned into a cruel tyranny. Yet, through every single one of those tragedies, he managed to maintain his unwavering faith in the light side of the Force and in the fundamental potential for good in the galaxy. He never gave in to despair or bitterness, even when he was completely alone in the desert. In the end, that persistence might be the most important part of the legacy of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He stands as a powerful and timeless reminder that hope can survive and even flourish in the very darkest of times. He shows us that no matter how complete and total the victory of evil might seem to be, the light side of the Force will always find a way to shine through the cracks. His story tells us that a single life, when lived with a clear purpose and a heart full of compassion, truly has the power to change the entire course of history for the better. He was a guardian, a teacher, a friend, and a legend, and his voice continues to echo through the stars, reminding us all to trust in our feelings and to never lose sight of the light. The silence of the desert on Tatooine was never truly empty. It was a vast, echoing teacher that spoke in the language of shifting sands and whistling winds. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, those long decades of isolation were not merely a time of waiting, but a period of profound internal transformation. He had to shed the skin of the High General, the negotiator who moved through the gleaming spires of Coruscant, and become a man of the earth and the Force in its purest, most raw form. When he first arrived on that sun-scorched world carrying the infant Luke in his arms, the weight of his perceived failures was heavier than the child. He felt the sting of every lightsaber clash on Mustafar, the heat of the lava, and the haunting echo of Anakin's screams. He had to learn how to live with the ghost of his brother, long before he learned how to become a ghost himself. This period of his life was perhaps his greatest trial, requiring a level of mental discipline that far exceeded anything he had practiced in the safety of the temple. He had to find peace in a galaxy that was being strangled by fear, and he had to maintain his faith in the light when the dark seemed to have won a total and final victory. The house he built in the Jundland Wastes was a reflection of this new, simplified existence. It was a place of stone and shadows, where the only riches were the memories he kept and the connection he maintained with the unseen world. He spent hours in deep, rhythmic meditation, reaching out with his mind to sense the flickering life of the young boy at the moisture farm. He watched Luke grow from a distance, seeing the child's first steps and hearing his first laughter carried on the thermal currents. Every time Luke looked up at the twin suns with a sense of longing, Obi-Wan felt a pang of both hope and sorrow. He knew that the boy's destiny would eventually pull him away from the quiet life Owen Lars so desperately wanted for him. Obi-Wan had to remain a shadow, a presence felt but not seen, a guardian who could never truly step forward until the Force signaled that the time was right. This required a selflessness that few could understand, to be the hero of the past who is content to be the hermit of the present for the sake of a future he might never see. During these years, his conversations with the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn became the anchor for his soul. Qui-Gon, who had always been more in tune with the living breath of the universe than the rigid ways of the past, taught Obi-Wan that death was not a wall, but a doorway. He explained that the Force was not just a tool to be used, but a vast ocean of consciousness that one could merge with, while still keeping the core of who they were. This was the ultimate secret of the Jedi, a truth that had been lost for generations, because the Order had become too focused on their role as politicians and soldiers. Obi-Wan had to unlearn much of what he had been taught within the stone walls of the temple. He had to learn to let go of his attachment to the Republic, to the physical order, and even to his own identity as a master. He had to become a student once again, listening to the wisdom of a man who had passed into the great beyond. This spiritual journey was the foundation upon which the eventual victory of the light was built. One of the most difficult things for Obi-Wan to manage during his exile was the complicated relationship he had with the truth. When people look at his life, they often point to his certain point of view as a way of avoiding the harsh reality of Anakin's fall. But for Obi-Wan, it was more than just a clever play on words. It was a way of preserving the memory of the good man he had loved while acknowledging the monster that had taken his place. He truly believed that the Anakin Skywalker who had fought beside him in the trenches of the Clone Wars was gone, replaced by a cold machine of hatred. By separating the two in his mind, he was able to maintain his focus on protecting Luke without being paralyzed by the grief of what he had lost. It was a defensive wall for his own mind, a way to keep the light inside him from being extinguished by the overwhelming darkness of the Empire. He knew that one day he would have to explain these things to Luke, and he prayed that the boy would have the strength to understand the nuance of a galaxy that was rarely ever just black and white. His mastery of the defensive style of lightsaber combat, known as Soresu, was also a reflection of his personality and his journey. It was a form that prioritized patience, energy conservation, and the ability to outlast any opponent. It was the resilient way, and Obi-Wan was its greatest practitioner. He didn't need to strike first. He only needed to be there, steady and unshakable, until the enemy defeated themselves with their own rage and exhaustion. This was how he lived his life on Tatooine. He outlasted the Empire through sheer, quiet endurance. He sat in the desert, a lone spark of light, while the darkness raged all around him. He knew that the dark side was like a fire. It burned bright and hot, but it eventually consumed its own fuel and turned to ash. The light, however, was like the suns of Tatooine. It was constant, enduring, and capable of bringing life to even the harshest of places. As the years turned into decades, Obi-Wan's physical body began to age and slow down, but his presence in the Force grew exponentially. He became more attuned to the subtle shifts in the galactic energy. He could feel the growing power of the rebellion, a tiny flame of resistance that was beginning to catch in the hearts of oppressed people across the stars. He felt the moment when Leia Organa began to take on her role as a leader, showing the same fire and determination that her mother had possessed. And most importantly, he felt the Force beginning to stir within Luke. The boy was like a dormant seed, waiting for the right moment to break through the surface of his mundane life. Obi-Wan knew that his time as a watcher was coming to an end. The Force was gathering its strength for a final decisive movement, and he was prepared to play his part, even if it meant his own end. The journey to the Death Star and his final confrontation with Vader was not a mission of combat for Obi-Wan. It was a mission of transition. He went there knowing that he wouldn't be coming back in a physical sense. He saw the massive station, a mechanical monstrosity that stood as a symbol of everything the Sith represented: fear, destruction, and the cold rejection of life. When he disabled the tractor beam, he wasn't just helping a ship escape. He was removing the final obstacle for the new generation of heroes. And when he stood before Vader for the last time, he didn't see a formidable enemy to be defeated. He saw a lost soul, and he saw a chance to show Luke the ultimate power of a Jedi. By allowing Vader to strike him down, he proved that the Sith's power was an illusion. You cannot kill an idea, and you certainly cannot kill a man who has become one with the energy that creates the entire universe. The moment he vanished into the Force, Obi-Wan became a permanent part of the galaxy's heartbeat. He was no longer limited by a physical body that needed air and water. He was everywhere at once, a voice in the wind, a feeling of intuition in the back of a pilot's mind, and a steady hand guiding the heart of a young man who was about to change the world. He was with Luke in the cockpit of that X-Wing, whispering the words that would lead to the destruction of the Empire's greatest weapon. He was with Luke on the frozen plains of Hoth, giving him the direction he needed when he was lost in the cold. And he was there on the second Death Star, watching from the unseen world as the Son redeemed the Father. The joy he must have felt in that moment, seeing Anakin return to the light before his final breath, is something that transcends human language. It was the ultimate validation of his faith and the fulfillment of the promise he had made to Qui-Gon so many years ago. Even in the years following the fall of the Emperor, the legacy of Obi-Wan Kenobi continued to ripple through time. He remained a source of guidance for Luke as he worked to build something new from the ruins of the old. He helped Luke understand that the future of the Jedi shouldn't be a replica of the past, with all its rigid rules and emotional distance. He encouraged a way of life that embraced compassion and connection, the very things that had ultimately saved Anakin. His influence was felt in the way the New Republic was formed, and in the stories that were told to the children of the new era. He became a symbol of the eternal nature of the fight for justice, a reminder that even when the light seems to have gone out, it is merely waiting for someone with the courage to find the spark. There were even whispers in the Force long after Luke himself had passed into the great beyond. When a new darkness rose and a new generation of heroes was called to action, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi was still there, a faint but steady presence in the chorus of the past. He was a part of the collective memory of the light, a guardian who would never truly leave as long as there were those who sought to do good. His story, from the humble beginnings on Stewjon to the halls of the temple, from the battlefields of the Clone Wars to the silence of the desert, is a testament to the power of a single life. He showed us that greatness isn't found in how many enemies you defeat, but in how many people you inspire to find their own strength. Reflecting on his life, we see a man who was defined by his loyalty. He was loyal to his master, even when they disagreed. He was loyal to his apprentice, even when that loyalty was tested by betrayal and blood. He was loyal to the Republic, even as it crumbled into a nightmare. And most importantly, he was loyal to the Force itself, trusting in its wisdom, even when it led him into the deep shadows of exile. He never sought power for himself, never asked for fame, and never wanted to be a legend. He only wanted to be a helper, a guide, and a protector. This humility was his true power, the thing that allowed him to touch the Force in a way that the arrogant Sith could never hope to achieve. The world of the Jedi is a world of balance, and Obi-Wan Kenobi was the perfect expression of that balance. He was a warrior who loved peace, a teacher who never stopped being a student, and a man of high importance who lived the life of a simple hermit. He understood that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. The end of the Jedi Order was the beginning of his vigil. The end of his life was the beginning of his true power. And the end of the Sith was the beginning of a new hope for everyone. He taught us that we are all connected by an energy that is far greater than our individual selves, and that by tapping into that connection, we can achieve things that seem impossible. In the quiet moments of the night, if you listen closely to the stars, you can almost hear the echoes of his wisdom. You can hear the hum of a blue lightsaber, the calm voice of a negotiator, and the chilling call of a krayt dragon. You can feel the presence of a man who gave everything he had to ensure that the light would never be extinguished from the stars. He remains the gold standard for what it means to be a hero, not because he was perfect, but because he was persistent. He faced the darkness, and he chose to light a candle rather than curse the shadows. He walked through the fire and came out stronger on the other side. As we conclude the story of this legendary figure, we are left with a feeling of deep gratitude for the path he walked. His journey reminds us that our own lives, no matter how humble they may seem, have the potential to ripple out and affect the lives of others in ways we can't even imagine. Every act of kindness, every moment of patience, and every choice to follow our instincts for good is a way of honoring the legacy of the man who was Obi-Wan Kenobi. He showed us the way, and it is up to us to keep walking that path, keeping the light alive in our own corner of the galaxy. The story of the Jedi will go on, changing and evolving with each new generation. But the name of Kenobi will always be a cornerstone of that history, a beacon of hope for anyone who finds themselves lost in the desert. He was the boy from the Kibuk clan who grew up to save the galaxy, not with a massive army or a terrifying weapon, but with a promise and a lightsaber and a heart that refused to give up. He was the master of the resilient way, and his resilience is his greatest gift to us all. He proved that even in a galaxy of billions of people and countless star systems, a single person with a clear heart and a steady mind can make all the difference. He became one with the Force, and in doing so, he became a part of us. His adventure didn't end on the Death Star, and it didn't end on Endor. It continues every time someone chooses compassion over hatred, and every time someone stands up for what is right in the face of overwhelming odds. The spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi lives on, a silent guardian, a watchful protector, and a timeless symbol of the light that binds us all together. Thinking back to those first steps he took in the Jedi Temple, it's amazing to see how far the Force took him. From a child who broke the rules because he followed his instincts, to a man who became the ultimate keeper of the ancient ways. He found the balance between the rules and the heart, between the duty and the feeling. He was the anchor in the storm for Anakin, and he was the foundation for Luke. He carried the grief of a lost era and the hope of a new one with equal grace. There will never be another like him, a man who could talk his way through a war and fight his way through a nightmare, all while keeping a smile and a sense of humor. He was the heart of the Jedi Order in its final days, and he was the soul of the rebellion in its first. The galaxy is a big place, full of many different stories and many different heroes, but the story of Obi-Wan Kenobi is one that will always stand out. It's a story about the strength it takes to be a good man in a world that has gone bad. It's a story about the power of friendship and the pain of loss. And ultimately, it's a story about the victory of the human spirit over the cold, mechanical pull of the dark side. He left behind a legacy of hope that will continue to shine as long as there are stars in the sky. He was the negotiator, the general, the hermit, and the master. But to those who knew him best, he was simply a friend who was always there when he was needed most. The Force will be with him, always, and through him, it will be with all of us. When we consider the vast timeline of galactic history, the period of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Empire is but a small fraction of the total. Yet the actions of Obi-Wan Kenobi during this brief window of time echo across the millennia. He was the one who bridged the gap between the old ways and the new, between the fall of the light and its eventual rebirth. He stood at the crossroads of history and made the choices that allowed life to continue and thrive. Without him, the Sith would have ruled the galaxy forever, and the knowledge of the Jedi would have been lost to the sands of time. He was the thread that held the tapestry of the light together when it was being pulled apart by the hands of evil. As the sun set on our look at his life, we can imagine him now, standing alongside Qui-Gon and Yoda and Anakin, a part of the glowing chorus of the Force. He is at peace, his mission complete, his duty done. He has earned his rest, but his influence is far from silent. He is in the stories we tell our children about the brave knights of old. He is in the feeling of peace we find when we connect with the world around us. And he is in the courage we find when we have to face our own darkness. He was Obi-Wan Kenobi, a legendary Jedi, a true hero, and the eternal guardian of our hope. His journey is a reminder that no matter how distant the stars may seem, the power to reach them is already inside us, waiting for us to reach out and touch the Force. In the final accounting of his deeds, it wasn't the battles he won on the front lines or the Sith Lords he defeated that truly mattered. It was the simple fact that he stayed. He stayed at his post on Tatooine when it would have been easier to run or to join the fight elsewhere. He stayed true to his heart when the world around him was telling him to give up. He stayed a guardian for a boy who didn't even know he existed. That kind of staying power, that kind of quiet, unyielding commitment, is the rarest and most valuable thing in the universe. It is the rock upon which everything else is built. And so we remember him not just as a warrior, but as the man who stayed in the light no matter how dark it got. The sands of Tatooine will continue to shift, and the spires of Coruscant will continue to reach for the stars. But the name of Kenobi will never be forgotten. It is carved into the very history of the Force itself. He was the boy from Stewjon who became the light of the galaxy, and his story will continue to inspire us for as long as we have the courage to look up at the stars and dream of a better world. He taught us that even in the face of death there is life. Even in the face of hatred there is love. And even in the darkness there is always, always the Force. He was the master of the resilient way, and his resilience is our eternal inheritance. The light will always find a way, as long as there are those like Obi-Wan Kenobi to hold the lantern. The story of his life is a circle that has finally been completed. From the infant found by the Seekers to the spirit watching over the celebration on Endor, he walked the path that was laid out for him with honor and dignity. He faced every challenge with a level head and a brave heart. He loved deeply, he lost greatly, and he lived fully. He was the bridge between the past and the future, the master who became a legend. And as we look one last time at the blue glow of his spirit, we can almost hear him say, with that familiar and comforting voice, "The Force will be with you, always." It is a promise he kept for his entire life, and it is a promise that continues to hold true for all of us today. His adventure is over, but his legacy is just beginning. The galaxy is safe, the Jedi are returning, and the light has won. And in the heart of it all, standing steady and true, is the man we will always know as Obi-Wan Kenobi. His story is a part of us now, a light to guide us through our own dark nights, and a reminder that we are never, ever truly alone. The Force is within us, binds us, and connects us, just as it connected him to the stars. And so, with a heart full of hope and a mind full of peace, we say goodbye to the old master, knowing that he will always be there, just on the other side of the veil, watching over us with a smile. The legend of Kenobi lives on, forever.